The landscape at the Santa Rita Experimental Range, southeast of Tucson, has been managed and monitored for more than a century. SNR professor and director for research at the range, Mitch McLaren, shares some of the strengths of this historical perspective and explains how he and his colleagues solve some rangeland mysteries.
If we don't know the history of a place, we don't know how unique the present is. For example, since the year 2000, we've seen an 80% decline of grass and the disappearance of burrowweed, a species which once covered a fifth of the range. Has this happened before, and has the range recovered? As it turns out, the answer to both questions is yes. Grass abundance was also low in the 1950s following a prolonged drought, and again, we were in a drought from 2000 to 2005. And because we've seen 4 cycles of burrowweed over the last century, we know that today's decline falls within the normal range of variability. How have we seen all of this? We can watch a lot of the vegetation change through repeat photography, which you're seeing here. Photos were taken at the exact same spot each decade or so, giving us a picture of the shifts in vegetation over the century. In some cases, however, we find ourselves in uncharted waters. We are seeing the highest levels of mesquite ever, though the increase seems to be leveling off. One of our questions is whether the Santa Rita is reaching a carrying capacity for mesquite. Is there room for more mesquite? One thing we do know about mesquite is that it harbors a lot of carbon in the wood and in the soil beneath it. And if you kill a mesquite, from 70 to 100% of that carbon will be returned to the atmosphere within 40 years. How do we know this? Again, because of the long-term data set. In the 1960s, a large area of the range had the mesquite killed to prevent the woody plants from taking over the grassland. Knowing this, we set out to find the mesquite skeletons. We analyzed the soil at the base of those skeletons and compared it to the soil under large and small living trees, and found that by the year 2000, 70 to 100% of the soil organic carbon and nitrogen had been lost. The lesson? Large mesquite sequester significant quantities of carbon. Efforts to control mesquite would be better to focus on the smaller trees. Another unprecedented change has been the spread of an invasive species, bufflegrass. Unlike the other shifts in vegetation that we've seen, bufflegrass makes the landscape prone to more fire, causing major losses to native vegetation. Our efforts to control bufflegrass are focused on the reduction of fire risk and on the preservation of habitat for endangered species like the Pima pineapple cactus and the desert tortoise. Here you can see volunteers, including students in the Tierra Seca Rangeland Club, pulling bufflegrass as well as spraying herbicides. While it's a difficult pest to control, our efforts have begun to show success. As you might have guessed, the vegetation dynamics at the Santa Rita are influenced by rainfall and cattle grazing. Dr. George Rule has been testing an adaptive management approach for grazing based on the timing of the monsoon. His approach relies on the historic information to help him interpret current conditions. The Santa Rita is a natural laboratory where vegetation, climate, and grazing are studied together over a large temporal and spatial scale. Questions can be asked and answered on the Santa Rita that cannot be addressed anywhere else. The hundreds of researchers from around the world who have chosen the Santa Rita as their field site would have to agree. The knowledge gained at the Santa Rita provides important insight into arid lands and rangeland management.